This is Ashish R. Bidekar, and welcome to my podcast, The ARB Show. I'm thrilled to introduce today's guest, Philip. Philip is the founder, creator, director, and manager of D2 Design and Development, which specializes in industrial design and product design. He is based in Australia. Philip has been working as an industrial designer and product designer for over 30 years. His specific design methodology is for entrepreneurs, and it helps them to de-risk the venture of a new hardware product or consumer good. Some of the exciting products which D2 has designed includes solar inverter, IoT device or services, a sleep-related wearable, a natural fiber chair, cable management device, dynamic bike saddle. Philip is also an author and keynote speaker, as well as a TEDx speaker. Over to you, Philip. Do share your life journey and your vision for D2 design and development.
Thank you. Well, thank you for having me today. I seem to recall you wanted me to share a couple of principles regarding what I do. So maybe I develop a bit in the background in what you just shared in the introduction. So thank you for that. So I've been a designer for about 30 years. I studied with a mechanical engineer degree, and then I studied industrial design. And that gave me an edge from day one because what I knew how to draw, I also knew how to manufacture. So that was a pretty convenient combination. But over the years, I worked with many entrepreneurs and companies, and I realized that some product can be well designed and still not really hit the right note in the marketplace. And that got me really curious. I wanted to understand what was going on. And so the product, having a good product is definitely a good start, but that's not enough. So in my early 20s, I started to study marketing and business modeling, to understand what would be the overall impact of the design and include the design process into the business process in and of itself. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. And today I work mainly with serial entrepreneurs, and I help them move from an idea to a product to a business. So in that context, if you want, I kind of isolated 5 principles that we can talk about today. And I'm also more than happy to have a conversation. So feel free to stop me at any time or any point, so that we can really have more of a conversation than anything.
Definitely. So, I mean, the reason for having that framework, where we request the guest to talk about 5 top areas, is to have that, all the insights and the wisdom of the guest can be distilled in concise points, right? So it becomes easier for the audience to kind of focus on those points, and those are the key takeaways. So so over to you, Philip. Maybe you can start with what's the first principle you would like to highlight.
Yeah, sure. So the first one, I called it the design concepts. So very often when a client has a need, the designer will produce a certain number of ideas, concept. And what I've noticed over the years is that some designer will just offer one and then come back with a client who say, okay, this is your answer. And it can be possible. I'm not saying that's not, impossible, but at the same time, there are different ways to arrive and to solve a problem that the client has. So I think it demonstrates some more creativity and insight when you come with a client with a whole range of different concepts and ideas. And if I want to share a small trick today, I'm going to share that through a story. In my early 20s, I started working with a company and with the founder. And that was the first time the founder hired an industrial designer. And so arrived the day of the presentation of the concept. So that's the first big meeting we have after the sales and agreement meeting. And the client was as white as a sheet of paper. Like he was completely livid. And I think during the meeting, he just realized what he was doing. Like he spent so much money on someone he didn't know. And he was really scared about the results he was going to have. So I'm sharing this because the way I presented the results also really gave him confidence. So at the time, that client had one issue that he needed to solve, and I had many other ideas that were more like disruptive or something like this. But even though as a designer you want to start with the great idea because it's very exciting, in terms of psychological process, you may not want to do that. So I started my presentation by just answering their problem. It's like, okay, this is your problem. This is one simple answer. And then from that, you move to, okay, if you go, with that simple answer and add something else, then it's going to look like this, or it's going to behave like that and everything. And that was really interesting because I could see, as I was moving through the presentation, I could see the client starting to relax. And then because also it was more relaxed, I think it was more open to, new ideas.
Right.
And strangely enough, the client picked one of the most disruptive ideas that we had on the presentation.
Right.
So
also, so I think also it could be a psychological aspect wherein if there is only one option, the client would feel helpless. But if he has 3 or 4 options, then at least he feels empowered, and where he says, okay, I can select this, or maybe give feedback that feature A from option 1 plus feature B from option 2 plus feature 3 from option 3 is something, if you can combine it, that's what I want. I think maybe it could be a psychological issue where, customers or clients would feel more in control. But that's a very, very apt suggestion, because many a times, just a single solution, though it might be the best one, people like to have choice, right? It's like saying that you can wear, though the famous quote from Henry Ford says that, they can have any car as long as it's black, but fact of the matter is people like choice. So if you give them choice and enough choice, maybe 2 or 3, but if you kind of give them 10 choices, then again it's paradox of choice. Well, they'll feel again not in a position to take decision, but enough choices which kind of prompts them to take a decision. That's a great first principle. What would be a second principle which everyone should keep in mind?
Well, the second principle is a bit aligned with the first one. Is usually after that first initial meeting, when you presented a number of concepts and ideas, the client will usually pick one and say, okay, this is the one I want. And also, I've also noticed that some designers will take that and will just rush into development or something like this. And usually at that point in time, I would rather pause and offer what I call variations, or it's called declination too, but variation could be probably the best English term for that. And the whole idea of variation. So if we come back to the first principle, which is design concept, so you present a triangle, a round, and a square, to make it very, simple. And the client would pick one of the shapes. Okay, this is really this one I like. And then the variation is like, okay, let's say you pick a triangle. Well, you can have this one, but it can be much flatter, or it can be more pointy, or it can be, crooked or something. And exploring variation, it's a very interesting exercise because it changes the proportions of the product, and sometimes you can really get a different look and feel just by moving a couple of lines here and there, and it's a very, very good exercise to do. I remember when I was a student, one of my teachers told me to we were supposed to draw cutlery cutlery, and like a fork, a knife, and a spoon and everything, and we had to do 500 drawings per item. And I can tell you that you explore variation in all their forms. And of course, the point of the exercise is that you go through excitement at the beginning because you find stuff. And then there's a whole phase where it's really boring and repetitive until you come back down, and then you may or may not, but you're likely to have a breakthrough from some form because you've been through a phase that is mechanical, so to speak, but then you're going to explore things that you couldn't think of at the early stage of the variation process. So I think variation is a very good angle also to explore.
Right. And also, just if you may like to clarify, all this is at a concept stage. You're not actually building anything. So all these concepts can be kind of in form of a slideware or in an illustration, or even it could be a simple sketch as well, right?
Yeah, they could be sketches. Sometimes we do early prototypes on what we call early mock-ups. And they could be, paper, cardboard, foam, or, like something that allows you to prototype things quite quickly. But usually they are illustration and sketches.
Right, right. What would be the third principle which you want the audience to focus on?
Well, the third one is there's a point, so you've been through the concepts and everything, and now you're starting to develop the product, the look and feel, the textures and all the things. But one of the principles I like to highlight at that stage is trying to link with manufacturing as early as you can. And because, manufacturing, depending on the technology, the volumes and everything, they all have different constraints. And because of that, what you design may not be a good fit for that manufacturing technology. And my opinion is that as a designer, you should be involved in a manufacturing process and really understand not necessarily all the details, but at least the principles. And you get those principles and you bring back that into the design and your sketches and your 3D modeling and everything. And the idea is to make sure that the design fits the manufacturing and make the manufacturing possible at least, but easy, that would be even better for cost purposes.
Right.
So
right.
Again, I can share a small story. So when I was 22, like a very young designer, and I was working on my very early products, and for one of my clients, we're designing an industrial machine. And so we agreed with the client on the shape, like we were quite happy with one of the shape. And I just drove to the next composite manufacturer and asked for a meeting and met the head of the company and said, okay, this is what I'm going to design, and I'd like to know, what's possible. And I remember the face of the person is like, like people give me 3D files or technical drawings, but not a sketch. What do you want me to do with a sketch? He said, well, the point of the sketch is that we're going to share an idea, but if you need draft, you need to tell me now, and I need to know what they are, and I need to know how much they are and everything. So we had that discussion, and that went very well because the process moving from design to CAD to manufacturing was very, very smooth.
Right. So here, just additional point on that. Do you also factor in the supply chain constraints? For example, let's say there's a specific material which the client wants into the product, and that specific material or machining technique is a very limited vendor base, right? And it's based maybe in Taiwan or it's based in specific geographies. And from your market research that all the vendors, their order books are full. Maybe they kind of have a batch processing, and now the earliest you can have it is maybe 6 months later on. That's one kind of product constraint. The other constraint could be related with supply chain, right? It could be related with, say, materials, or it could be related with some, let's say it is related with some electronic aspects of sub-assemblies. So plus also, do you consider things like in the post-installation phase, for example, do you also consider things like design for service, like a post-sale process, right? Yeah. Do you factor that as well during the design phase itself?
Yeah, definitely. So I got two examples in mind. One is a couple of years ago, we designed an IT product. And so we had to make sure that we work with the electronic engineers and also order the parts we wanted to order, like the number of chips and boards and everything, so that we can secure the dimension of that, so that we had the right box and design for it. And so we definitely did that, and that's definitely part of the design process. The other aspect that I have in mind is I've been studying sustainability for many years, and I'm a big fan of design for disassembly and everything like this. So for example, cable stop, one of the products that is of my own brand and everything, can be completely dismantled and reused at the end of the life cycle. On a different note, I also remember that when I designed an industrial machine many years ago, we had maintenance people going to the machine every few months. And before that, they had to open the machine and move a number of layers. And like that was really complex to go into the guts of the machine. And that made their job very, very difficult. And we completely changed the architecture of the machine. So instead of having that, we had all the boards at the back of the machine, back on the wall, and somewhere on the drawer. So you could just open the back, pick a drawer, and then do what you needed to do, and then put everything back. So the maintenance was done in sometimes just a few minutes, and in comparison to hours of work. So that was a real benefit for the company, but also it's much more fun to have something that is user-friendly.
Right. Also, this is, again, I would say, a very hidden aspect, and not many people focus on this aspect, because from a business perspective, like in the example which you mentioned, if you have got a field of, let's say, 100,000 field technicians out there servicing a machine, etc. So every hour they spend at a machine for maintenance or installation is a time and a cost to the company, right? So if they're able to do the job faster, that's straight away saving it to the bottom line. So and that all is because it's been designed properly, right? So it's very interesting for people to focus and appreciate that the more details and more thought you put in at the design phase, you're going to have the benefits much later on, right, across the product life cycle. So that's really
definitely. So what we do when you start a project, we identify all the stakeholders that involved around the product that we're designing. And in our case, they were the buyer, the user, the consumer, and they were the head of operation, they were the maintenance people. So we discovered quite a number of people that were interacting with the machine, and they were not even mentioned before in any brief. So that was a good outcome.
Exactly. So that brings us to the fourth principle. So what is the fourth principle you would like to highlight?
Yeah, the fourth principle is, I call that design for market fit. So when you design a product, you need to really design for a specific audience. Usually I like to give the example of, let's say you need to design a tea service, or a cup of tea and a mug or something. Well, you don't design the same mug for the people in Melbourne, or for people in Japan, or for people in the UK. And the reason why, they all have a different experience with tea. They all have their own culture around tea. They all have the different environment, like in terms of who you have tea with, like is that your friends, or is that more a social thing or a business thing? And because of that, you have very distinct environments. So that dictates really the function and the features and the look and feel of your product. So design for market fit, that's really, really important. You need to understand very, very clearly who you're designing the product for. And the other important features of that is when you do the design for market fit properly, you can measure, not with great accuracy, but a reasonably good sense, the volumes of people that will or may buy your product, and that condition manufacturing. So it's very useful from the manufacturing and design for manufacturing point of view, but also from the pure business marketing point of view. So you have a very clear idea of your target market, and because of that, you have a very clear indication of the volumes of production you can have, because you don't design for 200 parts the same for 5,000 and the same for 100,000 parts. There are different technologies here, different level of investments and everything. So you need to know where you're going.
Exactly, and you brought a very nice aspect of an international product, because as you rightly mentioned, it's important to appreciate the content as well as context for kind of a product market fit. So on the same note, can you share some story about a product design which you started, and it was good for an initial market, but from a concept based on market understanding, that was not the same, or you had to kind of redo the whole concept because the same concept or the same product did not do well in another audience, or let's say in Japan or other parts of the world. So any insights which you can share?
There is one, most of my clients don't want me to share too much some of the details, but I'll just share one from quite a few decades ago. We were designing ski equipment for companies in Europe, and the ski equipment you can sell in Europe have a different look and feel than technically the same ski equipment you sell, for example, in Japan, because the color combination and the color scheme is completely different. So what works, let's say, in Switzerland and Belgium and Italy, like, a nice blue with a red block or something like this, that's not going to work in Japan. They need to have a purple and different type of green, or something like, or yellow, purple, and green. So you need to have a very different combination of colors, and that's just respecting the cultural differences.
Yes. In fact, I was reading somewhere that there is also a huge color psychology, right? Every color means something in each culture, and many times the same color is not cannot be transferred or cannot be translated in other cultures, right? For example, red is a positive culture in many Asian countries, but I read somewhere that green is not exactly popular in China, for example. So there are such cultural nuances which are done. Also, it could also be the fact that things like what's the kind of duty cycle, or what's the kind of the product which is going to be used, right, in terms of the frequency, that could change as well, right? For example, the same product, if let's say is used by young people, will have a different kind of a duty cycle versus the same product if it's going to be used by, let's say, elderly. So maybe that's what you kind of factor in.
Yeah. Well, I remember one of the stories regarding colors is in the West, and especially Europe and everything, like white is really for weddings and everything. In India, that's very different, as
exactly.
you know. So it's for the the dead and the death process and everything. So you need to be very, very careful, but also just aware of the cultural differences, and probably dive into the different segments. I understand what are they and how to adapt to them.
Right, and of course, there are many stories on the kind of faux pas which many companies do when it comes to brand names, right? For example, we may think of a very fancy name, but it could mean something totally different in another country, right? So that could be a reason.
Definitely, yeah.
So that brings us to the last principle. What's the fifth principle you would like to focus on?
Yeah, the last principle, I call that design for business model. And the whole idea to do that is kind of twofold. One is you need to know your numbers. And when I say that, a lot of people think you need to know like the manufacturing numbers, like how much will cost my product to produce at that level of volume or something like this. But that's just a small part of the different costs of the business. So you have storage cost and shipping cost and all that. But the biggest one that I've seen being forgotten, I guess, is the cost of acquisition of customers. And that's something that is not really included, and if so, it's not really precise, I find. And you need to know with as much precision as possible what's the cost of acquisition of customer per product you're selling. Many years ago, I was consulting for a company, and they were asking me to design a more profitable product. So I asked the question, I'm happy to do that, but I need to know what's the cost structure. So, and they gave me, well, this is the cost of manufacturing of this product and the cost of manufacturing that product. So you need to lower those costs to make that better. And I said, well, that's one aspect, but there are the costs. What are the costs of storage, shipping, freight, and mainly the cost of acquisition of customers? And they said, oh, we don't have any. I'm like, well, sorry, I don't understand. Like, your marketing is free? So, no, we have a marketing department. We don't have any cost of acquisition. I said, well, I think if you want me to design a proper profitable product, we need to understand, what's that line, and so that, we can do something about it.
Right. In fact, I read somewhere that specifically when you are looking at hardware related products, you need to factor in the distribution channels as well. Very early on, because let's say you're a D2C product and it's primarily going to be via e-commerce sites, then you need to have a different way, a different thought process. But if you're going to also have, say, physical stores in which you want to display it, etc., then that has a different cost aspect. I also read somewhere that it's important to factor in the reverse logistics as well. So let's say a customer is unhappy with the product, then what, right? For example, then there has to be a workflow wherein maybe you collect the product from the customer place, bring it back to a central warehouse, and then ship it back, things like that. But point is, if such details are not thought through at a very early stage, you're going to have this hidden cost can really blow out of proportion, right? And that could
they
be,
can, and sometimes you don't even know if you're profitable if you don't know all those costs. Right. So I did a kind of a visit or expertise for a company a few years ago, and after some time working with them, I realized they were losing money in every sales.
Wow.
Because their cost structure, and they didn't take into account many costs, and their cost structure was too high in comparison to their retail price.
Right.
And so they were going nowhere. So that was a very, very big issue. So not a very nice discovery, though.
Right. So a couple of points. Thanks for this 5 principles. Really gives it a very nice perspective. I just wanted to ask a couple of more questions. So one is on the compliance side, right? We know that there are many compliances which need to happen, right? For example, specifically if you are looking at a hardware or electronic product, there are various kind of certification done, and there are many agencies like UL, etc. Also, there could be some country-specific compliances, and maybe more so when you talk of anything which is a medical-related stuff or related with healthcare. So there are additional compliances. So how do you factor all such constraints in terms of compliances, etc., at the design stage itself?
Yeah, well, that's a very good question, and compliances can be quite easy sometimes depending on the manufacturer. So if you work a manufacturer which has already done those compliances and it's more the iterative product and everything, so you don't have too much to worry. But sometimes compliances can be a huge work. So I work in 2 industries, as you know, that have a high level of compliances. One is the medical one, and we hired an expert in order to achieve that. And another one, I used to work for a company that was manufacturing and making aquarium tanks, fish tanks. And if you want to summarize what you do in a fish tank, you put 230 volts in water. That's what you do. And of course, you need a high level of safety and compliances there. And the compliances are actually merging with different industries. Like it's just one industry specific. There are several compliances you need to fit together. So again, we had an expert working with us in order to decipher what was supposed to be done and what we're supposed to be doing with the engineers and the designers there. So yeah, that's definitely factoring. That's definitely part of the R&D process. And in the case of the fish tank, we had a lot of testing to do. We spent a lot of time testing and refining the product.
Right. You mentioned briefly about sustainability. Is that something which is picking up well? I mean, what I read about sustainability, specifically in product design, evolves around 2 factors. One is after the product is used or it has completed a life cycle, it becomes, it's biodegradable, right? So that's one. And second aspect, what I've read is in the product itself is you try to create it using by a waste product, like waste to wealth kind of concept, right? So are you seeing that in a major way, those trends?
Well, I have been studying sustainability for about 30 years now. And after 30 years, what I know is that there's no simple answer. Like I wish I could tell you, oh yeah, you just do this and replace that material with another one, but it's not that simple. So I'll give you an example for Cable Stop, which is a small cable management device that we designed a few years ago. I could have chosen like a biodegradable plastic, but the thing is they don't last as long, and they tend to decay a bit after a few years. And they require, because I think that was like a corn-based type of plastic that we could have chosen at the time. And because of that, we kind of do what we call a transfer of pollution. So instead of having a petroleum one, you use another one that needs to be replaced more often. So, that's not very good in terms of sustainability. But also the transfer of pollution means that you were taking a lot of water and fresh water out of the ground in order to produce the plastic, and if you do that like 4 or 5 times in the lifetime of the product versus one with a petroleum, you realize that's not really sustainable. So that's a very interesting angle. It's sometimes really difficult because when you do the life cycle, sometimes you just shorten the life cycle to maybe an instant or just a few years something. But if you realize that if you really look at the whole lifespan of the product and really include what's happening before and after, sometimes you really have surprises, and just changing the material to something that feels good because it sounds good, like is still not the right thing to do. It's a very complex issue.
Right.
Yeah.
Excellent. So great. Thanks so much, Philippe, for a wonderful exposition about the principles for design. Really, I enjoyed this conversation. And thank you, dear listeners. Thank you for tuning in. To subscribe, share, and like this podcast. Available on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcast. Bye for now. Thanks.